Hello, hello. This is Catherine again with my second video. Thank you for coming back if you watched the first one, and welcome if you're new. And I figured I would just make a new video every week, so I'm going to try to upload every Tuesday, film every Thursday, take the whole weekend to edit, and then upload everything on Tuesday because I'm slow as shit when it comes to editing. I wanted to do sort of like beginner's classics. What are the classics that people when they first get into them really love and find to be really accessible? Because I'll be honest, classics, when you say like, oh yeah, we're reading a classic or you're reading a classic in class, it can be scary. Like classics can be very, very scary. And I completely understand. It's a lot of antiquated language, there's a lot of plot devices, references that are out of date and not used anymore. So they can seem a little weird. But I swear to you, once you start one, you'll be hooked and then you'll keep wanting to read more. A lot of times too, people gatekeep a lot of these books. They're like, oh well, if you haven't read Thackeray's Vanity Fair, then what are you really reading? Like people really do like to gatekeep these books, which I don't agree with. They're classics for a reason. They were written in a time period. They're supposed to sort of show what that time period was like, but they've stood the test of time since then, and they've been enjoyed by generations because there's something in them that speaks to any future generation. It's just unfortunate that sometimes people think that they aren't smart enough to read them, or they think that those books will be too difficult, or that they'll be boring. And I'm here to tell you that is so far from the case. And there's so many books out there that are great entry levels, the gateway drugs, may I say, into the world of classics. So I just wanted to make this kind of a quick video, just 6 books that I think, if you're new to classics, these will be great ones for you to start with. This is basically just based on if they're accessible to read, if you're not struggling too hard with the language. This is based on enjoyability, because really, at the end of the day, you're only going to read a book not based on like, if this is a book I should read. You're going to read it if it's fun to read or not. And if it was something that I think that people would generally agree to be considered classics. I picked ones that are in the 19th century, but then I also picked ones that are more towards the middle of the 20th century that we now consider to be definitely classics. What a classic is, that's definitely up for debate. I would say that people would agree that there's like very set ones that are classics, but I think that that is a very amorphous term. I really love books that are like, oh, this was a forgotten work by this author, but we've just figured out like how amazing this book is, so we're now considering it a classic. So I think it's a loose term, but that makes it all the more fun because then we'll never get to be done reading these books. What classics is can be a video for another time, and that's a discussion that I'm not necessarily an expert on. I have a degree in theater. I did improv for a degree. I know nothing. But I just wanted to go through each of these books. I'm going to go through them chronologically, just so that you can be like, ooh, I don't want to do anything in the 19th century. Now you could skip ahead a little bit. Hey, let's begin. The first book I'm saying is going to be a good one is Around the World in 80 Days. Look at, come on. How could you be scared of this? Look at this. She is so small. She fits in like in the tiniest bag. She's skinny. This was so fun to read. I would actually say this is a good summer book as well. If you're looking to get into classics and you're looking for a beach read, if you're one of those people, then this is definitely the book. This is the only Jules Verne I've ever read. Never read anything else by him. I know he's done 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. What else has he written? Blanking on Jules Verne. What has he written? Journey to the Center of the Earth. He is known as kind of like one of the first science fiction writers. And because of that, I like science fiction, but it's not necessarily my favorite genre. So I was a little like, oh, okay. But then this is just pure fun, this book. It's about this guy named Phileas Fogg, and he gets this valet man, sort of this manservant named Passepartout, who's a French guy, to join him. He literally hires him day one, and then Phileas, at like a card game, basically gets into this bet with these guys he plays cards with. He's like, oh yeah, I could traverse the world in 80 days, and I'll do it right now. I'm gonna leave right now. Which is absurd. He's literally like, to the hour and the minute and the second. I will be back here in 80 days, no problem. Of course, he's not like, oh, okay, I'll get going tomorrow. He's like, oh, let me go call up my manservant I just hired, and we're gonna leave right now. And everyone thinks he's nuts because this is back. When was this written? 1872. So the world is just starting to get kind of small. Things are starting to be a little bit more international, but it's still, there's no planes yet, there's no jets, there's no high-speed rails. This book moves at a lightning pace. It is walking so fast, and it does not look to see if you're catching up with it. It just moves. So if anyone's like, oh, well, classics move slow and it takes forever, Jules wasn't waiting. Jules was going. Jules was moving fast. If you want something just really quick and really fun, because they just get into all these like crazy adventures, and they have a lot of hindrances that get in the way of their travel. If you're looking for just something like adventurous and fun, and that moves very fast, I'm telling you, I read this in maybe 2 days. This is a really nice, easy first classic to get into, and it's made me want to read more Jules Verne. I'm like, oh, like this is what this is. Oh, well, I'm gonna read more of his stuff because this is a fun little book. The next one is one of my favorite books of all time. I haven't read it in a long time, but I'm ready to read it again. Dracula by Bram Stoker. This book, I know a lot of people's favorite book that is similar or that's lumped in similarly to this book is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which was written, they kind of bookended the 19th century, with Frankenstein being very early 19th century and Dracula being, which I didn't realize until researching this video, it's 1897. But I love Frankenstein, great book, but I do find the language of that one to be a little bit more challenging than the language of Dracula. I could not put it down. This is me having this. I read this kind of after the height of the whole vampire movement, and you know what I'm talking about. I was 13 in 2009 when Twilight like dominated everybody's thoughts and senses and loins. So I was like, I'm done with vampires. Like, I don't want to look at another vampire. And I got Dracula for Christmas. I got the nice penguin cloth bound. I was like, fine, I'll read this. Could not put it down. Like, it was such a good book. And it's a great accessible read, I think, because the language I did find to be more accessible than Frankenstein. Um, I read it in high school without any issue. And also its characters and its themes that you already know. It's not that it's not original, because for its time, this book set up the genre and it was one of the first. So it's definitely original because we've lived in like the post Twilight, post Vampire Diaries, post Let the Right One In, and just thinking of like every vampire thing ever. Because we know all of that already, it's already motifs and images that you already know. You know what Count Dracula looks like. You know there's a virginal woman that's like, oh, that's gonna get bit. He sleeps in a coffin, an old timey castle. You know all these motifs already. So that's already kind of set up in your mind, which I think then primes you to know the story that much better when you get to it. But then you can really appreciate the writing, the like dark, macabre writing that this guy did. Unbelievable. And it is one of my favorite books. And I say that having not have read it in a bit, that's how you know, because it has stuck with me for so long. So I am very excited to get back to that book. Probably it's like a spooky October, September, fall read. I'm very excited to get to that. Ah, okay. So enough about Bram. Oh yes. So the next one is The Awakening by Kate Chopin. Kate Chopin. So this is a great book. I read this earlier this year. It had been on my list. This is one of those ones that sat on my TBR forever. And it was like, when are you going to read me? And I was like, Kate, we'll get there. Like, whatever. Great, great, great classic. Very quick read. This is less than 200 pages, I'd say. Yeah, this copy is 185. Very quick. This was written in 1899. It's American. It's set in New Orleans. It's about this woman. Her name is Edna. She's kind of trapped is it a loveless marriage? She's feeling very unfulfilled. You can interpret that the way you want to interpret that, but she basically is not feeling fulfilled in this life, both with her husband in that way, but also she doesn't feel like she's really living up to the potential she's supposed to as a woman. There's a lot of these kind of foil characters in the book where they're these perfect wives. Like they're so good at it and they just seem like they're fitting in with the mold of what late 19th century women in the States were supposed to be. And Edna just like doesn't she just doesn't feel that that's her at all. And so then she's like kind of grows this connection with this guy Robert, and it just kind of unfolds. So good. I raced to the end of this. I could not stop. I think I read this maybe in 2 days. Very accessible language, a lot of great symbolism and vivid imagery in this that just had me, it just kept me going. And there was so many other like great little characters in here. There was this one woman, wait, what was her name? Oh yeah, this woman named Mademoiselle Rice. She's kind of like an old spinster lady. She's a really accomplished pianist who she becomes friends with Edna. And she is kind of like why do you care so much? Because she's a woman who's just been like, you know what, I don't want to partake in that at all. I'm just going to be a spinster. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to like be kind of an oddball and play my piano, but I'm not going to take part in all of that. And so like she was a great character to read because Edna was like kind of like, ooh, like maybe I want to be part of that world. But then she also was like, no, I got to do what I have to do. Great, great read. And again, not, I wouldn't say this is challenging to get into. This book was written before Virginia Woolf, not maybe not before Virginia Woolf ever wrote, but before her books became prominent. So this is not necessarily, because I think Virginia Woolf was so good at getting into the actual psychology of the person. You want a psychological book, Mrs. Dalloway is definitely that. But this is great because it's not as psychologically intricate or as intense as Virginia Woolf. I think the language is a lot more accessible than Virginia Woolf, but it still is that like really great 19th century portrait of a woman, but like gets into her psyche in a way that's accessible and is really intriguing to read. I can't recommend this enough. Please read this book. Next is also one of my favorites. It's Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Like, do I have to say anything about this book? Like, if you've never heard of this book, get out of here. Just go. It's such a great book. It's somehow manages to be like a almost like a gothic Victorian novel, but it was written in 1938. So the language feels like a little antiquated because it was written in the 30s, kind of like if you're watching an old 30s movie. But the way du Maurier is able to master the mood and the tone of this book, it's so good. It's so if you don't know, if you have been going this long and not know what Rebecca is, it's about this narrator. She's an unnamed narrator. She is kind of this like shy young woman. She's traveling throughout Europe with a chaperone because we're in that kind of time period where you traveled with an older lady who was making sure you weren't up to shit. And she meets while she's like they're on the French Riviera or they're somewhere in Europe. They meet this very like dashing, kind of aloof, but very charming, handsome, very rich widower named Maxim de Winter. And I mean, this guy's supposed to be he's supposed to be hot. He is the brooding type that I think I always love in literary worlds, but if I met this guy in real life, I'd be like, you're such a panty ass. Because he reveals, oh, my wife passed away, and I'm kind of like just figuring out what I'm doing. So they have this kind of quick whirlwind romance, and they get married. And he brings her back to his estate, Manderley. And so everything's like fine and dandy until she gets to this estate and she realizes that like the whole household has basically been frozen in time almost. And the whole house is still paying homage to the dead wife, Rebecca. And especially there's a housemaid who was so obsessed with Rebecca to the point you're like, honey, this woman feels so overwhelmed because she doesn't feel like she could ever live up to the standards and the expectations that Rebecca set forward. So with that in mind, it is, oh, I mean, it's an amazing Hitchcock movie done in 1940 with Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine. If you want like a good spooky movie, definitely go for that. But I recommend reading the book first because I swear it is, you will be hooked. You will be hooked. I also sped through that book like it was nothing. Please do me a favor. Please, you can leave this video if you want. Just go get Rebecca and go read it. Next is a John Steinbeck novel, East of Eden. This book blew me away because I was not expecting it at all. I was like, I read Grapes of Wrath in high school. I had to read it my sophomore year of high school. And like, it was good. I liked it. It's definitely an American classic. Great slice of life about the Dust Bowl. Sure. But I wouldn't say that I was wowed by that book or like it touched me. Touched me. No, it was okay. So I got East of Eden for Christmas probably that same year or maybe junior year, and I was like, okay, I will grant you this. It is a long book. It's East of Eden is a bit long, and that might scare some people. They might be like, oh, that's a thick book. That's really big. But no, trust me when I say I sped through it also so fast because I just needed to know what happened in this book. And John Steinbeck, he did in Grapes of Wrath, but more so in this book, was just able to write in a way that you almost were unconscious you were reading. And that's when you know you have a really good book. If I have to like sit and concentrate, that like, come on, let's like, my mind's wandering. Okay, wait, no, I'm supposed to be reading right now. That's how you know it's maybe not engaging me as much as it could be. This book, I would go through pages and be like, oh my god, I was reading that, and that wasn't just a movie in my head. Like the images he was able to evoke in this were so strong. Um, and again, it's sort of like with Dracula, it's a lot of imagery that you may already know. That being said, it's a lot of Christian imagery, so maybe if you didn't grow up with a Christian background, maybe it wouldn't come to you as easily. I'm not sure. Even living in America, you can kind of pick up on these images as things you may have seen before. It's about these two brothers, Cal and Aaron, who are just trying to make their way in the world. And one has kind of blossomed into this great man that everyone admires and is doing great in life. And the other is like kind of this black sheep, not doing so great, is the dark, brooding type, but not in the sexy Darcy way, like just kind of like a weird guy. Um, and it's about their father Adam, and it's about this woman Kathy, who's one of my least favorite characters ever created. And it's just about making it in the States. I mean, it is about the story of Cain and Abel. I don't remember much about the book of Genesis from my CCD days, but even with my limited knowledge in that, because I didn't grow up like really studying the Bible, I still was able to like grasp a lot of what they were giving me. I was like, oh, we recognize that. Oh, we know that. Cal and Aaron, with those images kind of in there, it makes it that much more accessible. But beyond that, again, even if you weren't raised Christian, if you even took that out completely, the book just stands on its own as its own fabulous story. It just is so moving and so good. So do not be scared by the size. I'm telling you, do not be scared of the size of that book. It is a work of art, and I think it's Steinbeck's best. I seriously think Eden, I think, was his finest achievement. So please, I'm telling you, that one is a great one. If you've never done any classics, that is a great one to start with. And maybe of all of them, that might be the one that I say go to that one first. It's so accessible. Last book, the last book is one that I read, was it last year? Last year or the year before? It had been on my list forever, and I was like, we'll get to it, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. We finally got to it, and I was like, oh, where was I? It's Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Great book. Great book. Considered one of the first, like, European-like novels written in Africa. It's about Okonkwo. He is kind of like this strong warrior man in the Igbo tribe in what is now Nigeria. And he is like he's doing his thing. He has a wife, he has children, he's doing well, he's very prosperous. And then these white missionaries come in to the village, and it's about, the results of them clashing, about them interacting, and then all of the terrible things that come with that, which doesn't take much for you to realize, like, oh, it's about what happens when white people come into Nigeria and completely mess it up. So this book was fantastic. I mean, it also one that I think is so accessible for you to read. It's not it's almost like, this book is, to me, feels almost like the Odyssey, in that it's very grand in scale. Okonkwo is almost like this, like, big mythic figure who's going to have a huge mythic giant downfall, almost like Odysseus, in the way that he's portrayed almost like this mythic figure. He almost, in the beginning, has no faults. He's so untouchable, but yet, because he sets it up like that, he's gonna fall. And the fact Achebe is able to do that in such a short amount of time, but I still get that feeling from this book, is incredible. So if you're someone who read the Odyssey, or is like interested in Greek classics, but maybe you're like, because I'll be honest, I read the Odyssey and I'm not the biggest fan on the planet of it. If you're like interested in that kind of tale and those kind of proportions, but you want it in a maybe more accessible way, this book will do that for you. It feels almost mythic, and I think just what he was able to do, and then what he was able to do because of this book, what that did for African literature and how it put it on the map, is we love. So this was great, and again, it's just a different perspective, and a way to get into African writers, because I'll be perfectly honest, I have not read too many African writers, but this definitely got me invested. Great one also is Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. I think that's the author's name. That's South African, and that is a great book. But I think the language in this one is definitely a little bit more accessible than Cry the Beloved Country. So definitely recommend this. Ah, ah, so many good ones. Please don't be afraid of classics, please. There's literally nothing to be afraid of. They're kind of like the equivalent of like a shadow on the wall of what looks like a wolf, and then you turn the corner and it's like a rabbit. It's like that. They look big and scary, and sometimes they are in length big and scary. But once you get, a chapter or two in, and you get used to how the book is moving, you get used to its rhythm, the way the characters speak to one another, you will get invested. These stories have lasted the test of time for a reason. They still will touch you in ways that, not that contemporary literature can't. It's just that they can, and I think people don't necessarily realize that they can. So I think these are the ones. If you are really struggling to get into it, if you're like, I don't want to, or I can't, I swear to you, these are ones that will get you into it. These are ones I'd recommend to my 17-year-old brother. These are ones I'd recommend to anyone who is interested. And yeah, I mean, if you want more of these kind of like easy classic recommendations, it was hard to narrow down this list because there are so many, I think, that would make this list. I just didn't want to make a huge giant video like I did last time and take up all your sweet precious time. So I can always do one of these again. Thank you. Thank you so much for returning or coming for the first time. If this is your first time, leave me a comment. How did I do? Do I have anything in my teeth? What would you like to see next? That's always good. And I will see you again soon. Bye.